The archives recovered from the shattered remains of the Zephyrian command station tell a story that defies all conventional understanding of galactic warfare, species hierarchy, and the very nature of strength itself. What follows is the complete documentation of how a primitive species from a backwater planet called Earth managed to topple the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known, not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through something far more dangerous: the refusal to accept defeat. The Zephyrian hegemony had ruled for over 12,000 standard galactic years. Their empire stretched across 47 star systems, encompassing hundreds of worlds and trillions of subjects. They possessed weapons that could crack planets, fleets that blotted out suns, and a military doctrine that had never known defeat. Their soldiers were genetically enhanced warriors standing 3 meters tall. Their ships were powered by captured stars, and their very presence in a system was enough to ensure immediate surrender from any civilization unlucky enough to cross their path. Then they encountered humanity. The initial contact reports, filed in the Zephyrian military archives under classification level minor territorial expansion, paint a picture of supreme confidence bordering on arrogance. Admiral Kefvar, commander of the 47th Conquest Fleet, noted in his official report, the third planet of the system designated Sol. One contains approximately 7 billion primitive bipeds utilizing crude chemical propulsion and atomic energy. Estimated conquest time, 6.7 standard hours. Recommended garrison force, minimal. How catastrophically wrong they were. The first wave of Zephyrian ships entered Earth's solar system on what humans would later commemorate as Liberation Day, though at the time, it seemed more like humanity's final day. 300 massive vessels, each the size of a human city, appeared beyond Neptune's orbit and began their methodical advance toward Earth. Their message was broadcast in every human language simultaneously, delivered with the casual indifference of an exterminator announcing his arrival to a nest of insects. Primitive inhabitants of the Third World, you have been selected for integration into the Zephyrian hegemony. Surrender unconditionally and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and your suffering will be legendary. You have 1 solar rotation to comply. The response from Earth was not what the Zephyrians expected. Instead of the immediate capitulation they had grown accustomed to, they received thousands of different responses in hundreds of languages, most of which roughly translated to variations of "go to hell." The most memorable came from the emergency session of the United Nations, where the Secretary-General's official response entered galactic history. "We respectfully decline your offer. Please leave our system immediately, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." The laughter from the Zephyrian command deck could reportedly be heard 3 decks away. Admiral Kefvar ordered the demonstration phase to begin. A single ship, the World Render, approached Earth's moon and fired once. The resulting crater was visible from Earth's surface, a stark reminder of the power arrayed against humanity. Surely now the primitors would see reason. But something unprecedented happened in the aftermath of that demonstration. Instead of terror and surrender, something awakened in the human species that the Zephyrians had never encountered in 12,000 years of conquest. Where other species had calculated the odds and surrendered, humans began to prepare for war. Where others had despaired, humans began to hope. Where others had accepted the inevitable, humans did something that baffled Zephyrian intelligence analysts for months afterward. They began to get angry. The psychological profile reports from the Zephyrian Xenobiology Department, discovered in the wreckage of their research stations, revealed their complete inability to comprehend what they had stumbled into. Dr. Velthorn, chief Xeon psychologist for the Conquest Fleet, wrote, "The human response to overwhelming force appears to be paradoxical. Rather than triggering submission behaviors, the demonstration of superior firepower has resulted in increased coordination, resource mobilization, and what can only be described as enthusiasm for conflict. This response pattern does not match any known sentient species profile. Recommend immediate full-scale invasion to prevent further anomalous behavior development." The recommendation was approved. The full might of the 47th Conquest Fleet was unleashed upon Earth. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a revelation. The Zephyrians possessed every conceivable advantage. Their weapons could glass continents. Their armor could withstand nuclear detonations. Their tactical computers could process millions of variables per second. Their soldiers were literally bred for war, each one worth 100 of any other species' warriors. By every metric of military science, Humanity should have been extinct within hours of the invasion beginning. But military science had never accounted for a species that simply refused to acknowledge when it was beaten. The initial landings met fierce resistance, but that was expected. What was not expected was the complete absence of any centralized surrender when major population centers fell. Zephyrian doctrine was based on capturing key strategic points: capitals, military headquarters, communication centers, and accepting the inevitable capitulation that followed. Humanity, however, seemed to operate on an entirely different principle. When their capitals fell, new leaders emerged from nowhere. When their military bases were destroyed, civilians picked up weapons and became soldiers. When their communication networks were severed, they found other ways to coordinate their resistance. Commander Zek Null of the 23rd Landing Division filed increasingly frustrated reports as the invasion progressed. Day 12, Moscow has fallen, but resistance continues throughout the surrounding territories. Day 15, we have destroyed all known military installations in the region designated Europe, yet attacks on our forces have increased by 340%. Day 18, request immediate reinforcements. These humans appear to multiply when killed. The last observation, while hyperbolic, contained a kernel of truth that the Zephyrians were only beginning to understand. Human resistance wasn't diminishing under pressure. It was evolving. Every Zephyrian victory seemed to generate 10 new problems. Every human defeat became a rallying cry for others. Every demonstration of Zephyrian might was met not with surrender, but with adaptation. The turning point came in the third month of the invasion, in a series of events that Zephyrian military historians would later study obsessively, trying to understand where their doctrine had failed so completely. It began with a single human pilot named Maria Santos, flying a craft that by Zephyrian standards was barely worthy of the name aircraft. Her fighter jet, cobbled together from salvaged parts and running on fuel refined in a bombed-out refinery, should have been swatted from the sky by the first Zephyrian interceptor that encountered it. Instead, she managed to destroy 3 Zephyrian fighters before finally being shot down over the ruins of Sao Paulo. The engagement should have been forgotten. Just one of thousands of small skirmishes in a massive war. But something about Maria Santos's final moments, broadcast live by human resistance communications, ignited something that spread across Earth like wildfire. In her last transmission, as her crippled aircraft plummeted toward the ground, her words were simple: tell everyone they can be beaten. She was wrong, of course. Technically speaking, her 3 kills were statistical anomalies. Lucky shots against overconfident opponents who had underestimated their target. The Zephyrians were still vastly superior in every measurable way. But measurement, as they were learning, was not everything. The message spread through the human resistance networks with a speed that baffled Zephyrian intelligence. Within days, every human fighter on Earth knew the name Maria Santos. Within weeks, tactical approaches that should have taken months to develop were being implemented by resistance cells worldwide. Within a month, Zephyrian kill ratios had dropped by 60%, and their casualty reports were starting to include words that had never appeared in conquest documentation before: concern, unexpected resistance, and most alarming of all, request for additional resources. Admiral Keth Var, faced with the unthinkable prospect of a conquest operation lasting longer than his allotted time frame, made the decision that would ultimately seal his empire's fate. He committed the reserve fleets. The second wave of the invasion brought another 500 ships to Earth's solar system, along with the hegemony's most experienced ground commanders and elite shock legions. The plan was simple: overwhelming force applied with surgical precision to break the human resistance once and for all. Key population centers would be obliterated as examples. Military-age humans would be eliminated to prevent future uprising. The remainder would be processed for slave labor in the Outer Rim colonies. It was a perfectly sound plan, based on 12,000 years of successful implementation across dozens of species. There was no reason it shouldn't work on humans, except for one factor that no Zephyrian strategist had considered. Humans had been watching, learning, and preparing. The 6 months of brutal warfare had not broken them. It had educated them. They understood their enemy now in ways that their enemy had never understood them. They knew Zephyrian tactics, Zephyrian technology, Zephyrian psychology. Most importantly, they had learned something about themselves that even they hadn't known before the invasion began. They had learned that they were very, very good at war. The arrival of the second wave was met not with the desperate resistance of the first invasion, but with coordinated strikes that demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that should have been impossible for a species that had never fought an interstellar war. Human forces had apparently spent the previous months studying captured Zephyrian technology, analyzing their tactical patterns, and developing countermeasures that exploited weaknesses the Zephyrians didn't even know they had. The first sign of this evolution came when the Zephyrian heavy cruiser Dominator was destroyed not by human spacecraft, which were still hopelessly outmatched, but by a coordinated missile barrage launched from Earth's surface. The missiles themselves were crude by galactic standards, but they had been programmed with Zephyrian shield frequencies, captured from downed enemy fighters. The explosion was visible from 3-star systems away. More disturbing than the technical achievement was the strategic implication. The humans had not simply copied Zephyrian technology, they had improved it. Analysis of the wreckage showed modifications that enhanced efficiency by nearly 30%. A species that had achieved spaceflight less than a century ago was not merely matching Zephyrian engineering, they were surpassing it. Colonel Drac Mole, Zephyrian Technical Intelligence Officer, filed a report that would later be considered the first accurate assessment of humanity's true capabilities. These beings do not simply learn, they evolve. Every engagement provides them with data that they process not just intellectually, but intuitively. They appear to possess an innate understanding of warfare that transcends their technological limitations. Recommend immediate withdrawal and reclassification of target species to extreme threat. The recommendation was denied. The hegemony had never retreated from a primitive world, and they were not about to start with Earth. Instead, they escalated. The third wave brought planet crackers. These weapons, normally reserved for rebellious advanced civilizations, could literally shatter a world's crust and render it uninhabitable. Their deployment against Earth was intended to be the final act of the conquest, a demonstration to the galaxy that defying the Zephyrian hegemony would result in complete annihilation. The message was clear: surrender or watch your world die. Humanity's response was characteristically unexpected. Rather than surrender in the face of planetary destruction, they launched every ship they had, military vessels, civilian transports, converted cargo haulers, anything that could achieve orbit, in what should have been a futile gesture of defiance. The ragtag human fleet, numbering barely 300 ships against the Zephyrians' 1,000, accelerated directly toward the planet crackers in what appeared to be a mass suicide attack. The Zephyrian fleet commanders prepared to witness the final, pointless gesture of a doomed species. Instead, they witnessed something that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives. The human fleet began to sing. The transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, was picked up by every Zephyrian vessel in the system. It was a simple melody, sung by voices that ranged from children to elderly veterans, in languages from across Earth's surface. The words were different, but the meaning was universal. They were not songs of desperation or despair. They were songs of defiance, of hope, of absolute refusal to yield to the darkness. And as they sang, something extraordinary happened. Human ships, hopelessly outmatched and facing certain destruction, began fighting with a precision and creativity that defied all military logic. Civilian vessels became kamikaze bombers, ramming into Zephyrian shields at precisely calculated points to create cascading failures. Converted cargo ships launched clouds of industrial nanobots that had been reprogrammed to consume Zephyrian hull plating. Military fighters executed maneuvers that should have been impossible, guided by an intuitive understanding of physics that their pilots had somehow developed in the heat of battle. Most incredible of all, they were winning. One by one, the Zephyrian ships began to fall. Not through superior firepower, but through innovations that emerged in real time from the crucible of combat. Human pilots were discovering new tactics with every engagement, adapting to Zephyrian countermeasures before those countermeasures could be implemented. Human engineers were modifying their weapons between battles, incorporating salvaged alien technology in ways that the original designers had never imagined. The planet crackers, those ultimate weapons of the hegemony, found themselves under attack by swarms of small craft that somehow managed to penetrate their defenses through sheer unpredictability. Human tactics had evolved beyond anything in the Zephyrian combat databases. They were fighting a war of improvisation against a doctrine of overwhelming force, and improvisation was winning. Admiral Kefvar's final transmission, before his flagship exploded under the assault of a converted human mining vessel, summed up the Zephyrian experience. They cannot be doing this. By every law of warfare, By every principle of combat, they should be extinct. Yet here they are, destroying us with weapons they invented yesterday and tactics they conceived an hour ago. These are not primitives. These are not even soldiers in any sense we understand. These are something else entirely. What they were, as the surviving Zephyrian forces were beginning to understand, was evolution in action. Humanity had not simply resisted the invasion, they had used it as a catalyst for transformation. Every challenge had made them stronger. Every loss had taught them something new. Every victory had shown them what was possible. They had taken a species-threatening crisis and turned it into the greatest learning experience in their history. The fall of the third wave marked the end of the invasion phase and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history, a primitive species launching a counter-offensive against a star-spanning empire. Human ships, now incorporating the best of both human and Zephyrian technology, began appearing in hegemony space. At first, these were presumed to be scouting missions or terrorist attacks. The truth was far more ambitious. Humanity had decided to take the war to the enemy. The psychological impact of human raids on hegemony worlds cannot be overstated. For 12,000 years, the Zephyrians had been the attackers, the conquerors, the ones who brought war to others. The concept of their home territories being threatened was so foreign that they initially had no protocols for dealing with it. Their entire military structure was designed for expansion and conquest, not defense of the core worlds. Humans, meanwhile, had spent the past year learning everything they could about their enemies. They knew which worlds were critical to Zephyrian industry, which systems contained their major shipyards, which planets housed their military academies. More importantly, they had learned to think like their enemies while retaining the tactical flexibility that made them so dangerous. The first human strike hit the Zephyrian Military Academy on Korath Prime. The raid was surgically precise, targeting only military installations while carefully avoiding civilian casualties. This restraint, incomprehensible to Zephyrian military doctrine, served multiple purposes. It demonstrated human technical capabilities, avoided galvanizing civilian populations against them, and most importantly, sent a message that would resonate throughout the galaxy. These were not conquerors or destroyers, but liberators with principles. The second strike targeted the hegemony's primary shipyard at Vel Toron. This time, the attack was not merely destructive, but transformative. Human forces didn't just destroy the facility, they captured it, along with detailed plans for the next generation of Zephyrian warships. Within months, improved versions of these vessels, incorporating human innovations, were rolling out of converted Earth-based shipyards. The third strike was the most audacious of all. A small human fleet, led by a converted exploration vessel, penetrated to the very heart of hegemony space and delivered a message directly to the Zephyrian High Command on their capital world of Zeph Alpha. The message was simple, broadcast in perfect Zephyrian by a human diplomat who had learned their language during the invasion. We offer you the same choice you offered us. Surrender unconditionally, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and your suffering will be legendary. You have one standard galactic year to comply. The irony was not lost on anyone. But where the message diverged from the original Zephyrian ultimatum was in what followed. The human diplomat continued, "However, unlike you, we prefer a third option. Meet with us to discuss terms of peace. We have no desire to rule your empire or enslave your people. We simply want to ensure that what you did to us will never happen to anyone else again." The Zephyrian response was predictably militant. The High Council declared total war against humanity and ordered every available ship to converge on Earth for the final battle that would end the human threat once and for all. It was a massive commitment, nearly 2,000 ships, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, carrying enough firepower to sterilize dozens of worlds. It was also exactly what humanity had been hoping for. The year of interstellar warfare had taught humans many things. But perhaps the most important lesson was that Zephyrian strength was also their weakness. Their centralized command structure, their reliance on overwhelming force, their inability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, all of these could be exploited by an opponent who understood them thoroughly. The human defense of Earth during the final battle was not a desperate last stand, but a carefully orchestrated demonstration of everything they had learned about warfare, technology, and themselves. They met the massive Zephyrian fleet not at Earth's orbit, where the planet would be vulnerable to bombardment, but at the edge of the solar system, where they had prepared a series of surprises that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The first surprise was the asteroid belt. Humans had spent months converting asteroids into automated weapons platforms. each one equipped with captured Zephyrian technology and human improvements. When the enemy fleet arrived, they found themselves navigating through what appeared to be a natural asteroid field that suddenly came alive with weapons fire from every direction. The platforms were too numerous to eliminate quickly and too unpredictable to counter effectively. The second surprise was the sun itself. Human scientists had been studying Zephyrian stellar manipulation technology and had discovered something that their creators had overlooked. The same principles that allowed the harvesting of stellar energy could be reversed to create controlled solar flares. As the Zephyrian fleet pressed through the asteroid defenses, they were hit by waves of charged particles that wreaked havoc on their electronics and disrupted their formation. The third surprise was the human fleet. When it appeared, emerging from behind Jupiter where it had been hidden by the planet's radiation signature, it was no longer the ragtag collection of converted vessels that had fled Earth years earlier. These were purpose-built warships, incorporating the best of human and Zephyrian technology, crewed by veterans who had learned their trade in the crucible of interstellar war. They moved with a precision and coordination that spoke of years of battle experience and a unity of purpose that the Zephyrians had never achieved in their hierarchical military structure. But the greatest surprise was humanity itself. The species that had first encountered the Zephyrians as primitive tool users had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. They fought with the technical skill of an advanced civilization, the tactical flexibility of natural warriors, and the moral clarity of people defending their home. They had not simply learned to match Zephyrian capabilities, they had evolved beyond them. The final battle lasted 3 days and resulted in the complete destruction of the Zephyrian invasion fleet, not through some miraculous superweapon or alien intervention, but through the systematic application of 2 years' worth of hard-won experience. Human forces demonstrated mastery of three-dimensional combat, coordinated multi-ship tactics, and real-time adaptation to enemy countermeasures. They fought like a species that had been born to the stars, not one that had achieved spaceflight within living memory. Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding the human fleet from the converted cruiser Defiance, sent the final message of the battle to the surviving Zephyrian vessels. You are defeated. Your fleet is broken. Your empire is finished. But you are not our enemies anymore. You are our responsibility. Surrender now, and we will treat you with the dignity you denied us. Fight on, and we will do what we must to protect the galaxy from your tyranny. The surrender, when it came, was not just military, but philosophical. The Zephyrian Empire, faced with an enemy they could neither understand nor defeat, acknowledged what had become obvious to every observer in the galaxy. Humanity had not just won a war, but had fundamentally changed the nature of what was possible. In the aftermath of the final battle, as human ships moved to secure Zephyrian territories and began the complex process of dismantling an interstellar empire, the question that dominated galactic discourse was simple. How had they done it? The answer, according to the human leaders who found themselves thrust into positions of galactic importance, was both complex and simple. They had done what humans had always done when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. They had refused to accept that the challenges were impossible. They had adapted, evolved, and overcome, not through any single brilliant strategy or technological breakthrough, but through the relentless application of the most human of traits, the absolute refusal to give up. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been a xenobiologist before the war and became Earth's first interstellar diplomat after it, put it most succinctly in her address to the newly formed Galactic Council. You asked us what our secret was, how we defeated an enemy that should have crushed us without effort. The secret is that we never accepted that we were supposed to lose. Every setback taught us something new. Every defeat showed us what not to do next time. Every small victory proved that victory was possible. We didn't win because we were stronger or smarter or better equipped. We won because we never stopped believing that we could win. But perhaps the most profound insight into humanity's victory came from an unexpected source, the Zephyrians themselves. Dr. Velthorn, the xenopsychologist who had originally dismissed humanity as a primitive species, spent the years after the war studying human psychology and culture. His final report, published shortly before his death, contained an observation that explained everything. We made a fundamental error in our assessment of humanity. We saw them as they were at the moment of first contact and assumed that was what they would always be. We failed to understand that humans are not a static species. They are a becoming species. Every challenge transforms them. Every crisis evolves them. Every defeat teaches them how to achieve victory. We thought we were conquering primitives, but we were actually educating the most dangerous opponent the galaxy has ever known. A species that grows stronger with every battle, smarter with every setback, and more united with every threat to their survival. The transformation of humanity from a planetary species to the leaders of galactic civilization did not happen overnight. The process of dismantling the Zephyrian Empire while maintaining galactic stability required skills that humans had never needed before. Interstellar diplomacy, multi-species administration, and the delicate balance of power among dozens of different civilizations. But just as they had adapted to interstellar warfare, humans adapted to interstellar governance. The key to their success, according to historians of the period, was the same quality that had won them the war: the refusal to accept that complex problems had no solutions. Where the Zephyrians had ruled through fear and overwhelming force, humans governed through consensus building and mutual benefit. Where the Empire had demanded tribute and submission, the new Galactic Federation offered partnership and protection. The results spoke for themselves. Within a decade of the war's end, galactic commerce had increased by 400%. Interspecies conflicts had dropped to their lowest levels in recorded history, and technological advancement had accelerated at a rate that astounded even human scientists. The galaxy had not just survived the transition from Empire to Federation, it had flourished. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. This ancient human wisdom, carved into the memorial erected on the ruins of the first Zephyrian landing site on Earth, became the unofficial motto of the new galactic civilization. It spoke to the truth that had been demonstrated in humanity's victory, that true strength came not from the absence of weakness, but from the constant process of overcoming it. The humans who had first faced the Zephyrian invasion had been, by any objective measure, weak. They possessed primitive technology, limited resources, and no experience with interstellar warfare. But they had also possessed something more valuable than any weapon or shield: the capacity for growth. Every human who fell in the early battles made the survivors stronger. Every ship that was destroyed taught the builders how to make better ones. Every defeat became a lesson. Every loss a motivation. Every setback a step toward ultimate victory. In destroying their weak selves, the selves that accepted limitations, that surrendered to superior force, that believed in their own inferiority, humanity had become indestructible. Not because they were invulnerable, but because they were infinitely adaptable. Not because they could not be defeated, but because they would never stay defeated. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled for 12,000 years through the simple principle that might made right. They had conquered dozens of species, enslaved hundreds of worlds, and built a civilization on the foundation of their own superiority. Their strength was absolute, their weapons were irresistible, and their victory was inevitable, until they encountered a species that didn't believe in inevitability. Humanity's triumph over the galaxy's mightiest empire was not just a military victory or a political revolution. It was a demonstration of the most profound truth in the universe: that consciousness is not a passive thing that simply observes reality, but an active force that shapes it. The humans who faced the Zephyrian invasion had chosen to see themselves not as victims of superior force, but as the heroes of their own story. They had refused to accept the role of the conquered and had instead claimed the role of the conquerors. In the end, that choice had made all the difference. The galaxy today bears little resemblance to the one that existed under Zephyrian rule. Where once there was fear, there is now cooperation. Where once there was oppression, there is now opportunity. Where once there was stagnation, there is now growth. The transformation has been so complete that younger species, those who have grown up under the Federation, find it difficult to imagine how things were before. But humans remember. They remember what it was like to face an impossible enemy with inadequate weapons and overwhelming odds. They remember the fear, the desperation, the moments when surrender seemed like the only rational choice. They remember because those memories remind them of who they were, who they became, and who they choose to be. The war against the Zephyrian Empire ended more than 30 years ago, but its lessons continue to shape human civilization and galactic policy. The principle that guided humanity through its darkest hour, that any challenge can be overcome through adaptation, cooperation, and refusal to accept defeat, has become the foundation upon which the new galaxy is built. And in the archives on Earth, in the halls where the great decisions of galactic governance are made, there hangs a simple plaque with words that capture the essence of humanity's triumph. They told us we were too weak to survive. We proved them wrong. They told us we were too primitive to fight. We proved them wrong. They told us we were too small to matter. We proved them wrong. They told us we were conquered. That was the biggest mistake of all. The galaxy's mightiest empire had indeed met humanity, and there was never any question about who would win. The only question was how long it would take the Zephyrians to realize that the war had been over the moment they made the mistake of trying to conquer a species that simply refused to be conquered. In the end, humans didn't defeat the Zephyrian Empire through superior technology or overwhelming force. They defeated it through the most human of qualities, the absolute conviction that the only thing stronger than the will to dominate is the will to be free. That conviction, tested in the fire of interstellar warfare and proven in the crucible of galactic leadership, remains the foundation of human civilization and the guarantee that never again will any empire, no matter how mighty, be allowed to bring darkness to the stars. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Humanity had destroyed its weak self, the self that accepted limitations, believed in its own inferiority, and surrendered to superior force. In doing so, they had become not just unconquerable, but undefeatable in any way that truly mattered. The galaxy's mightiest empire had fallen. The species they had dismissed as primitives now guided the destiny of trillions. The war was over, the victory was complete, and the lesson was clear. Never underestimate a species that simply refuses to give up.